Listen up, family, because what I am about to lay in front of you right now is not the kind of story you scroll past, not the kind of story you half listen to while you fold your laundry, not the kind of story you clip a 30-second sample of and keep it moving. This is the story that snaps the whole needle clean off the record. This is the story that the biggest names on this platform are afraid to touch with a 10-foot pole. This is the story that the biggest law firms in the country are watching in real time. And this is the story that finally, puts Chrisean Rock in a corner she cannot spin, she cannot pray, she cannot livestream, and she cannot rap her way out of. I need every single one of you to lock in with me tonight. Phones down, headphones on, notifications silenced. Because the internet is on fire, Chrisean Rock is standing in the middle of the blaze, and one of the people closest to the man at the center of this whole nightmare has just kicked the door wide open. And what walked out of that door might be the single most damaging piece of testimony Chrisean Rock has ever had attached to her name in her entire public career. This is not a rumor. This is not a shady tweet. This is not a live stream rant from somebody in a basement. This is her ex-boyfriend's former manager, on the record, with receipts, saying the words a lot of us have been whispering for months. And once you hear it, once you sit with it, once you let it settle all the way down in your chest, you are going to understand exactly why the prosecutors up in Maryland are not backing off, exactly why the internet refuses to let this story die, and exactly why Chrisean Rock might be facing the most dangerous chapter of her entire career. So buckle in, family, because tonight we are going all the way in, and we are not coming up for air until every single receipt is on the table. For anybody just tuning in, and I know a lot of you are, because this story is trending on 3 different platforms as I speak. Let me walk you through the pieces so nobody gets lost in the smoke. The name at the center of this hurricane is Ronny, the man a lot of people know as Ronny Doe, the man who publicly claimed to be the biological father of Chrisean Jr., the man who begged Chrisean Rock, in interview after interview, for a simple DNA test she never sat down for. The man who was gunned down outside his own home in Maryland before that test ever happened. That last sentence right there, family, is the whole reason this story refuses to breathe its last breath. Because when a man asks for a paternity test, gets denied, gets threatened, and then gets deleted, I do not care how many prayer emojis get posted. I do not care how many churchfront live streams get filmed. I do not care how many times Chrisean Rock hits her knees on camera and asks the heavens for cover. The questions do not stop coming. They only get louder. And tonight, family, they are the loudest they have ever been. Now, spinning the wheel forward, because this is where the temperature really jumps. And this is the moment the whole tone of this story shifts. All About the Tea just dropped an exclusive sit-down with Jess West, the woman who ran Ronny's business, the woman who booked his interviews, the woman who watched him blow up in real time after his conversation with Tasha K. flipped him into a household name. And Jess West did not come to that interview with hearsay. She did not come with vibes. She did not come with speculation. She came with the receipts of a woman who lived the story from the inside, who was there when the phone started ringing, who was there when the threats started rolling in, who was there when the plane tickets had to be booked, who was there when Ronny looked her in the eye and told her exactly who he was afraid of. And what she said in that chair should have every single one of you sitting straight up right now. Jess West said Ronny was living scared. She said Ronny was getting death threats. She said Ronny was so afraid he had to be flown out of Maryland and put up in Nevada just to breathe clean air. She said Ronny was watching his whole career explode on the outside while, on the inside, he was terrified he was not going to live long enough to see it pay off. And then she dropped the sentence that has the entire internet reeling. The sentence that has flipped this story from gossip into something a whole lot more serious. She said Ronny was not afraid of the streets. He was not afraid of some random op. He was not afraid of a beef with a nobody in his neighborhood. Ronny, according to his own manager, was afraid of Chrisean Rock and Chrisean Rock's family. Watch this closely, family. Feel the weight of that. Because a public figure being named specifically as the source of a man's fear, and that same man ending up gunned down inside a matter of weeks, is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and patterns are what put people in courtrooms. According to Jess West, the terror started rolling in right after that Tasha K. interview blew up. Ronny went from a name in the comment section to a subject of every gossip podcast on the platform in a matter of days. He sat down with tacos and shawarma. He sat down with Elle. He sat down with Tasha K. And once those interviews dropped, the atmosphere around him changed overnight. The manager says the threats came in waves. She says she personally got targeted. She says her pages got taken down. She says she got doxxed. She says Chrisean Rock's fans, the ones she described as unhinged in her own words, were coming for anybody standing next to Ronny. And the pressure was so intense the team started shuffling him between cities just to keep him breathing. That is not a small claim, family. That is a bombshell claim. Because what she is describing is not a random beef between exes. What she is describing is a coordinated intimidation campaign. And she is naming Chrisean Rock's inner circle as the source of it. Now, keep in mind, I am not up here saying Chrisean Rock did anything. I am not up here calling this proven. I am not up here throwing a verdict on a woman who has not been charged with a crime. What I am doing is reporting exactly what Jess West said on record and letting you sit with the implications like grown adults. Because that is what this platform is for. That is what this community is for. That is why you clicked. That is why you are still here. And I owe you the story, uncut, unshaven, exactly the way it is being told out there in the wild, with every dot, every dash, every uncomfortable comma left intact. Bear with me for a second, because I want to isolate the single most damaging line Jess West dropped. She said, and I am paraphrasing tight to her own words, that Ronny never told her he was afraid of anybody else. Not the streets. Not some random enemy. Not some Baltimore rival. Not some hater on the internet. Not some jealous former friend. He told her he was afraid of Chrisean Rock and her family. That is the sentence. That is the anchor. That is the line that changes everything. Because the moment a public figure is named specifically as the source of a man's fear, and that man ends up gunned down inside a matter of weeks, the conversation shifts from gossip to grand jury. That is exactly where this story is heading right now up in Maryland. Prosecutors are not treating this like a cold case. They are treating this like a case that just got a fresh coat of gasoline. And Jess West just handed them the match. Let me pull the temperature back for a second and remind you what Chrisean Rock has said publicly, because I want the record to be balanced. She has denied any involvement. She has said investigators questioned her already. She has said she was cleared. She has said Ronny was doing his own thing in his own city and she had nothing to do with what happened to him. And on paper, that is her right. She is entitled to defend her name. She is entitled to speak. She is entitled to the presumption of innocence just like anybody else who walks into a courtroom in America. But here is where the plot thickens, family. And here is why the internet is not letting this go. When the mother of Ronny's alleged son goes on Instagram Live crying and screaming and shouting out to the heavens, when the family of the deceased is looking straight into the camera saying they never got closure, when the manager of the deceased is telling the world he was terrified of his ex, the denial by itself is not enough anymore. The receipts are stacking on the other side of the table, and Chrisean Rock's public statements are starting to look thinner and thinner by the day. Now, I want to take you back to the origin of all this, because a lot of new eyes are on this story tonight, and I want everybody working with the same map. Ronny stepped forward months before he was killed and said publicly that he had a relationship with Chrisean Rock before she was Chrisean Rock, before Blueface, before the reality TV cameras, before the rap career, before the church pivot, before the Instagram brand deals, before the tour dates, before any of the noise that would eventually attach itself to her name. He said they were together. He said the timing of Chrisean Jr.'s birth lined up with him. He said all he wanted was a DNA test to prove it one way or the other. Chrisean Rock refused. Blueface, at various points, did his own theatrical dance around the question. And what should have been a simple lab result ballooned into one of the ugliest paternity dramas hip-hop has watched in years. A drama that ended, tragically, with one of the two men in that equation lying on a slab in a Baltimore morgue. And listen, family, I want to be crystal clear about something, because this is where a lot of people get lost. A DNA test is not a controversial ask. A DNA test is a $200 swap. A DNA test does not require anybody's permission except the child's legal guardian. A DNA test is not painful, it is not embarrassing, it is not invasive, and it is not time-consuming. A DNA test is the kind of thing an innocent party runs to, not away from. So when Ronny was going on every platform he could find, on every live stream he could jump into, begging for a swab, and the answer he kept getting was silence, that silence started to speak for itself. That silence is part of the reason this story has legs. That silence is the loudest sound in this entire timeline. And every single person watching this story from the outside knows it. You know it. I know it. The prosecutors know it. Chrisean Rock knows it. And that is why the pressure is not going anywhere. Now let me spin you back to the manager for another beat, because Jess West did not just talk about the threats. She talked about the industry pressure. She talked about how Ronny was starting to figure out that the deeper he pushed on the paternity question, the more powerful the response became. She talked about how the team had to become fearless just to keep him functioning. She talked about how she personally kept telling him, quote, "This comes with the territory. They're going to try to shut you up. They're going to try to scare you. They're going to try to make you retract every word you said, but you keep going." She said the whole strategy was go, go, go. And then, in the middle of that go, 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 the go stopped. Permanently. That is the sentence that lives with me tonight. Family. The go stopped. Permanently. Because that is exactly what happened. A young man with a paternity claim, a rap career on the come up, a manager who believed in him, and a mother waiting at home. The go stopped, and the world lost him. That is not the kind of timeline you can just brush aside. Family. That is not a coincidence you can shrug at. That is not a story you can bury under a nice Instagram caption. That is a sequence of events that any prosecutor, any homicide investigator, any veteran journalist would look at and say, "We need to pull this thread all the way out. We need to pull it until it comes loose. We need to pull it until every knot in this tangled mess of a case is untied." And that is exactly what is happening. The Maryland investigators are still active. They are still knocking on doors. They are still pulling records. They are still requesting phone data. They are still combing through neighborhood surveillance. They are still interviewing witnesses. And every single week, another piece of the puzzle floats to the surface. Tonight's piece, the manager's interview, might be the biggest one to date. Now, spinning the wheel forward again, because I know you want the ripple effects. Every gossip platform on the internet is running with this. Every podcaster, every YouTuber, every commentator, every livestream host, every barbershop pundit, every group chat detective. And a lot of them are not being nearly as careful as I am being with you tonight. A lot of them are stating things as fact that are still allegations. A lot of them are drawing conclusions the courts have not drawn. A lot of them are painting Chrisean Rock as guilty before a single grand jury has been convened. And that is a dangerous business, because Chrisean Rock has lawyers, and lawyers file paperwork, and paperwork wins settlements. So while I am giving you every piece of this story with the full weight of what it means, I am also making sure I stay on the right side of the word alleged. And I want you to do the same in the comment box, because our community is smarter than that. We report the story. We let the audience draw the conclusion. We do not do the court's job for them. But being careful with language does not mean being blind to patterns. And the pattern here is undeniable. When too many voices tell the same story, family, that story tends to be true. When a man tells his manager he is afraid, and then that man is gone, and then the manager goes on record, that is not gossip. That is testimony. When the family of the deceased says the same thing the manager is saying, that is corroboration. When the mother of his alleged child says the same thing the family is saying, that is a chorus. And when the whole chorus is singing the same tune, family, the algorithm cannot ignore it, the courts cannot ignore it, and you and I cannot ignore it either. The truth has a habit of surfacing in situations like this. And this one is surfacing fast. Now let me shift gears for a second and remind you why Ronny's voice mattered in the first place. Because a lot of the newer viewers only know him as the man in the headlines. They do not know the man Jess West is describing. They do not know the human being underneath the courtroom paperwork. Ronny was a rapper before he was a story. Ronny made music. Ronny was known in his region before the Chrisean Rock chapter of his life ever popped off. He had a network. He had collaborators. He had fans. He had ambition. He had a whole trajectory that was starting to lift off before it got cut down. And there is a whole conversation floating around. One Jess West touched on. One Ronny himself touched on in earlier interviews. That Chrisean Rock's own musical direction, the whole rap rock pivot she tried to sell the public a few years back, had fingerprints on it that traced back to the sound Ronny was building first. Now I am not here to litigate who invented what in a genre. What I am telling you is that the two of them shared history, shared a scene, shared collaborators, and shared enough overlap that when their public narratives started colliding, the collision was violent. Look, I have watched Chrisean Rock's public arc for years now. I have watched her go from the sidekick behind Blueface to a solo brand. I have watched her attempt music. I have watched her attempt reality TV. I have watched her attempt the church pivot. I have watched her stand in front of a congregation and speak on transformation, and part of me, the part of me that always wants to believe in redemption, wanted to root for that. Because I want to see any young woman with that much documented pain find some measure of peace. I want to see any young mother with a child on her hip step out of the chaos she was raised in. I want to believe that people can change. But the peace does not come from performance. The peace comes from truth. And truth means answering the question a grieving family is still asking. Truth means sitting down for the swap. Truth means letting the record speak louder than the sermon. Chrisean Rock has not done that yet. And until she does, the questions are going to keep chasing her down every hallway she walks into for the rest of her career. Now, spinning the wheel forward one more time, because I promised you I would give you every angle of this story. I want to talk about the internet reaction because it is telling. Chrisean Rock's fanbase, and she has a real one, do not get it twisted, has been in defense mode from day one. Every comment section she appears in becomes a war zone. Every negative video she is featured in gets flagged, mass-reported, dogpiled. Jess West even said, in her own interview, that her platforms got attacked. She said her pages went down. She said she personally received threats. So when you factor in that kind of retaliation architecture, the kind that punishes anyone who questions the queen, you start to understand why so many people who might know something are staying silent. Fear is a powerful gag order. And in Chrisean Rock's orbit, that gag order has been operating at full volume for a long time. But here is where the tide is turning, family. Here is where the story is starting to slip out of anyone's control. Because you cannot mass report a homicide investigation. You cannot flag a Maryland prosecutor off Instagram. You cannot brigade a grand jury. You cannot dox a detective off the case. You cannot pressure a witness once that witness is under subpoena. The fans can dogpile a YouTuber, sure. The fans can bury a comment section, sure. The fans can flood a hashtag, absolutely. But the moment law enforcement has physical evidence, witness statements, phone records, and a timeline of threats, the fanbase becomes irrelevant. The only thing that matters at that point is the paperwork. And the paperwork is being written as we speak. Now, I want to address the elephant sitting in the middle of the room, because I know a lot of you are typing it into the comments right now. You want to know if I think Chrisean Rock had something to do with Ronny's death. And my answer to you is the same answer any responsible person should give. I do not know. I cannot know. I was not there. I have no evidence. I have no receipts that place her at the scene. What I have is a manager on record saying he was afraid of her family. What I have is a mother of his alleged child crying on livestream. What I have is a public paternity dispute that ended in a bullet. What I have is a growing consensus among a lot of very smart people that the coincidence stack is starting to look less and less like coincidence. When too many voices tell the same story, family, that story tends to be true. And Chrisean Rock is running out of time to tell a different one. Let me pull one more thread, because I would not be doing my job if I skipped it. Blueface. Because Blueface is still, technically, the man the world thinks of when it thinks of Chrisean Rock. And Blueface has been all over the place on this. One minute he is claiming he ran his own DNA test on Chrisean Jr. and the child is his. The next minute he is dodging cameras. The next minute he is posting cryptic messages. The next minute he is showing up at Chrisean Rock's side. The next minute he is behind bars for something entirely different. If Chrisean Jr. is definitively Blueface's son, then Ronny's claim collapses on its own and the story becomes a tragedy without a motive. But if Ronny was even a possibility, even a shadow of a possibility, then everything Ronny said before he died starts to look like a man telling the truth into a wall that would not answer him back. And that wall is now the loudest silence in hip-hop. Now, I want to bring the manager back into focus one more time, because I want you to sit with the specificity of what she said. She said Ronny was flown out of Maryland. She said he was placed in Nevada. She said the reason was fear. She said the fear had a specific name attached to it. She said that name was Chrisean Rock and Chrisean Rock's family. That is not a vague accusation. That is not a loose insinuation. That is not a shot fired in the dark. That is a direct, on-camera, on-record statement from a woman who worked next to him every day of his final chapter. And I want you to ask yourself, in the honesty of your own head, if you were the prosecutor sitting in Maryland right now, would you close that file? Or would you open it wider? Because I know what I would do. And I think you know what I would do too. Now let me remind you of the meta-story here. Family, because the meta-story is important. This is not just about one man and one woman. This is about how the entertainment industry has been trained, decade after decade, to protect its most bankable names when the ugliest questions get raised. This is about how legal teams get deployed. This is about how PR machines get spun up. This is about how narratives get seeded on friendly platforms, while inconvenient voices get suppressed on hostile ones. Ronny was an inconvenient voice. Ronny was asking an inconvenient question. Ronny was pointing at an inconvenient possibility. And Ronny is not here anymore to keep pointing. That is the reality on the table, and no amount of church pew photo ops changes it. That is the reality that the industry does not want to talk about. And that is the reality that this platform, this channel, this community will keep pressing on until somebody, somewhere, gives us an answer that actually holds up under sunlight. Now, spinning the wheel forward, I want to give you the state of the investigation as of tonight, because that is what you came here for. The Maryland detectives, according to public reporting, are still treating Ronny's case as an active homicide. The shooting was described from the beginning as targeted, not a random robbery, not a random dispute, not a random flare-up. Somebody wanted Ronny gone. Somebody planned it. Somebody executed it. Somebody made the call. Somebody wrote the check. Somebody drove the car. Somebody pulled the trigger. And the question of who ordered it, who paid for it, and who benefited from it is exactly what those detectives are working through. Jess West's interview just handed them a very expensive new lead. Because when a manager publicly says the decedent named his ex as the source of his terror, that manager is now a witness. And witnesses get subpoenaed. And subpoenas open doors that even fame cannot close. Let me be blunt with you for a moment. If Chrisean Rock is innocent, completely, absolutely, on God innocent, then the smartest thing her camp could do right now is stop the theatrics, stop the crying live streams, stop the moral high ground routine, and simply sit down for the DNA test that started this whole thing. Because if that test comes back and says the child is not Ronny's, half the internet motive for this story collapses overnight. And if the test comes back and says the child is Ronny's, then at least the truth is on the table and the family can begin to grieve honestly. Either way, the swab is the exit ramp. Either way, the swab is the offboarding lane. Either way, the swab is the thing that could have prevented years of speculation and, arguably, a great deal of the pressure that led to this tragedy in the first place. And the fact that the swab has not happened yet, after years of public pressure, after a body in the ground, after a manager on record, that fact speaks louder than any Instagram caption Chrisean Rock has ever posted. Now, I want to bring in a few of the other voices on this, because I know you have been hearing them too. D3ath has been on livestream after livestream saying Chrisean Rock had Ronny handled. Taseki has hinted at the same thing. Multiple commentators, from every corner of the internet, have suggested the same thing. And every single time, the response from Chrisean Rock's team is the same. Deny, deflect, threaten, litigate. Nobody in that camp ever says, let us calmly release the DNA, calmly walk through the timeline, calmly answer the manager. Nobody. It is always noise, always outrage, always distraction, always a new controversy engineered to bury the old one. And when a camp spends more energy fighting the question than answering the question, family, the question is usually the answer. That is not me talking. That is the oldest rule in courtroom psychology. Now, look, I want to invite you into a real moment of reflection because I think the community deserves it. What we are watching here is not just a celebrity feud. It is a young man's life. Ronny had people who loved him. Ronny had a mother who carried him for 9 months. Ronny had siblings who grew up with him. Ronny had friends who came up in the same neighborhood he did. Ronny had, allegedly, a son who will grow up never knowing him, never hearing his voice in person, never getting the chance to look him in the eye and ask him the questions every son eventually asks his father. That son will grow up in the middle of a public storm, watching interviews about his father, reading comment sections about his mother, trying to piece together the truth of where he came from through the fog of fame, through the static of tabloid noise, through the smoke of legal filings. That is a burden no child should carry. And every single day that this case sits unresolved, that child's burden gets heavier. So when I press on this story, I am not doing it for the clicks. I am not doing it for the algorithm. I am doing it because that child deserves a truth. And the truth right now is buried under too many designer coats. Now, spinning the wheel forward for what might be the biggest twist of the night, the DNA question itself. Because there are conflicting reports circulating about whether a test was ever quietly conducted, whether a result was ever quietly buried, and whether the answer that already exists in some file cabinet somewhere is the reason this story keeps escalating. If there is a private result out there, and if that result contradicts the public narrative, then the fear Ronny described to Jess West starts to make a whole new kind of sense. Because the biggest threat to any celebrity's brand is not a rival. It is not a hater. It is not a diss track. It is a fact. And facts, once printed on a lab report, do not care about lawyers, do not care about PR teams, do not care about press releases, and do not care about how much your record label paid to keep them off the front page. Facts are the one thing money still cannot buy in America. And this story is on a collision course with one very specific fact that has been dodged for years. Now let me tie this all together for you, family, in one clean bow, before we head to your comment verdicts. Ronny asked for a DNA test. Chrisean Rock did not sit down for it. Ronny went on interview after interview. His profile grew. Threats came in. His manager watched him get scared. His team flew him to Nevada. He came back to Maryland. He was gunned down outside his home in what police called a targeted attack. His family says they never got answers. His manager now says he named Chrisean Rock and her family as the source of his fear. The internet has been asking the same question for months. Prosecutors are still investigating. Chrisean Rock has denied everything. The DNA test remains uncompleted. The story remains open. And every new week, another voice steps forward with another piece of the puzzle. That is the timeline. That is the record. That is what the public has in front of it. And that is why this story is not going anywhere no matter how many prayer emojis get posted, no matter how many stage performances get booked, no matter how many soft focus interviews Chrisean Rock lands on friendly platforms. The truth has a gravity to it, family. And the truth is dragging this story closer and closer to a courtroom. Now, before I close out, I want to give you one more thing to chew on, because you know I always leave you with a little something extra, because this community rides for the receipts, and I never send you home hungry. Jess West is not the only person from Ronny's inner circle who is starting to talk. There are murmurs, and I am careful with this word, murmurs, that other people who were around him in his final weeks are being contacted by investigators. There are whispers that phone records have been pulled. There are whispers that surveillance footage from his neighborhood has been analyzed frame by frame. There are whispers that a piece of physical evidence collected at the scene may be closer to identifying a suspect than the public has been led to believe. There are whispers that a specific vehicle has been of interest to detectives for months. There are whispers that a specific number in a specific phone has been of interest for even longer. I cannot confirm any of that on my end tonight, and I would never build a claim on a whisper. But I can tell you that the temperature of this investigation, from every angle I have visibility into, is not cooling. It is heating. And when investigations heat up, arrests tend to follow. So the question I am going to leave you with tonight is not whether Chrisean Rock is guilty. That is not my question to answer. That is a question for a judge, a jury, and the state of Maryland. My question for you, family, is simpler. If the manager is telling the truth, if Ronny really was flown out of state because of the fear Jess West described, how much longer can the denial machine keep spinning before something breaks? How much longer can a public figure keep her hands clean when the person she was named as fearing ends up in a graveyard? How much longer can the DNA question stay unanswered before the silence itself becomes evidence? How much longer can the industry protect a name that keeps ending up next to phrases like homicide investigation, active case, and person of interest? How much longer, family, until the branch bends so far it snaps? Drop your verdict in the comment box, family. Tell me if you think Chrisean Rock is going to be cleared. Tell me if you think an arrest is coming. Tell me if you think the truth ever gets pulled all the way out on this one. Or if this becomes another cold case that hip-hop pretends to forget while quietly whispering about it in every barbershop from Baltimore to Los Angeles. I want to hear from every corner of this community. The ones who ride for Chrisean Rock. The ones who ride for Ronny's memory. The ones who ride for Chrisean Jr. and want to see him grow up with his real last name. The ones who ride for nothing except the truth. Because tonight, we are all sitting in the same room, watching the same story and waiting for the same answer. And when that answer comes, and it is coming, family, whether Chrisean Rock is ready or not, I am going to be right here to break it down for you exactly the way I always do. Uncut, unshaven, all the way in. Because that is what this community deserves. And that is what I promised you when you clicked. So keep your notifications on. Keep your comments sharp. Keep your ears open. Because the next chapter of this story might drop before the sun comes up tomorrow. And when it drops, you and I are going to be the first ones on the record with the receipts. Now, one last thing before I let you out of here, because I want every single one of you thinking about it as you close the app tonight and set your phone down beside the bed. Ask yourself who benefits from the silence. Ask yourself who loses if the truth comes out. Ask yourself who has the money, the connections, and the legal cover to keep this story from ever reaching a verdict. Because when you follow the shadow of who benefits, family, you very often find the shape of who is responsible. And in this case, the shadow points in a very specific direction. I am not going to name it out loud. I do not have to. You already know exactly what I am saying. And so does everybody else who has been watching this story since day one. That is the story. That is where we stand tonight. Chrisean Rock is at the center of it. Ronny is at the heart of it. Jess West just added a fresh pile of fuel to it. Tasha K's original interview lit the first match. Blueface's silence is fanning the flames. The mother of Ronny's alleged son is screaming into the microphone. And the fire, family, is not going out anytime soon. It is only going to burn brighter. It is only going to spread further. And it is only going to consume more of the carefully built brand that Chrisean Rock has spent the last several years constructing. Because that is what fires do. They eat everything that is not made of truth. And Chrisean Rock's public story, from the outside looking in, has an awful lot of kindling wrapped around it right now. Stay tuned to this channel. Follow every update. Share this with the person you know who has been waiting for the truth to come out. Tag the friend who called this from the beginning. Send it to the group chat that has been dissecting this case in the Notes app for months. Show it to the Annie at the cookout who swore up and down something was off from the jump. And when the next revelation drops, and it will drop, mark my words, because Jess West has cracked the seal and the rest of the inner circle is watching, I will see you right back here in this exact room, in this exact seat, with this exact energy. Because this is not a story we are letting go. This is a story we are riding all the way to the finish line, all the way to the verdict, all the way to whatever comes next. Chrisean Rock is on the clock. Ronny's memory is on the line. Chrisean Jr.'s future is on the line. The city of Baltimore is watching. The state of Maryland is watching. The internet is watching. And the truth, family, is closer than anybody in that camp wants to admit. Drop your verdict. Hit the bell. Ride with me. And remember, when too many voices tell the same story, that story tends to be true. Chrisean Rock cannot outrun this one forever. Nobody can. Fame is not a witness protection program. Money is not a shield strong enough to block a subpoena. Prayer is not a substitute for a paternity test. And time, family, is not on Chrisean Rock's side. Every day that passes is another day the pressure gets tighter. Every week that passes is another voice that steps forward. Every month that passes is another piece of evidence the detectives get closer to. And when the final chapter lands, and it is going to land, you are going to be glad you were in this room the night the manager opened the door and let the truth walk out into the hallway. Because this is the story that changes everything. This is the story that separates the platforms that stayed quiet from the platforms that told you the truth in real time. This is the story that will be replayed, dissected, and quoted for years to come. And no matter which way it lands, you and I, family, are going to be able to say we were here for every single beat of it. See you again, very soon, with the next chapter.